Is the Holy Spirit God? The Holy Spirit is only portrayed in the Old Testament as being subordinate or lesser to God or than God. So Christians always say, well, the Trinity is Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, and these three are not one, but they're co-equal. So let's look at the Old Testament. Does the Old Testament agree with this or not? The first piece of evidence is Exodus chapter 15, verse 8. It says, "And by the Spirit of thine air, by the Spirit of thy air, by that if the and by the Spirit of thy anger have waters been heaped together, stood as a heap, have flowings congealed, have been depths in the heart of the sea." So the Hebrew word is ruah. So the Hebrew word used in Exodus chapter 15 verse 8 is ruah. Ruah, this Hebrew word translates as spirit. So notice how I highlighted the Hebrew word there. The Hebrew word ruah, this Hebrew word translates as spirit. So the correct translation is by the spirit of thy anger. So the Spirit is under the command or is subordinate to God, according to Exodus chapter 15, verse 8. So let's look at the other piece of evidence, or the second piece of evidence. The second piece of evidence would be Isaiah chapter 48, verse 16, where it translates, "Come near me and say to this, from this announcement I have not been spoken in secret. At the time it happens, I am there. And now the sovereign Lord has sent me endowed with the Spirit." So notice how the Spirit is under the command of God, or is subordinate to God in Isaiah chapter 48, verse 16. So what that means is that the Holy Spirit is under the command of God and does not act alone, or does not have doesn't do independent actions. So according to Isaiah chapter 48 verse 16, the Spirit is under God or is subordinate to God, according to Isaiah chapter 48 verse 16. Also see in the Old Testament, also see Numbers chapter 11 verse 17, Joel chapter 2 verse 28, and Isaiah chapter 41, or Isaiah chapter 42 verse 1. The Spirit is subject to God or is subordinate to God. So then how then can it be equal? How then can the Holy Spirit be equal to God if the Spirit is subject to God or is lesser or subordinate to God? So the conclusion here is that the Old Testament teaches that the Spirit is subject to God or is subordinate to God. Thus, the Holy Spirit cannot be God or co-equal to God, since the Holy Spirit, according to the Old Testament, is subject to God or is subordinate to God. So the Christian concept that the Holy Spirit is co-equal to Father and Son is false, at least according to the Old Testament itself. So it's the New Testament, or it's the Christian theology that teaches different things than what the Old Testament teaches about the Holy Spirit.